What's up, my know-it-alls? Alright, so we're gonna do something a little bit fun this week. I intend to do the know-it-all files. So the know-it-all files are, I call myself Mr. Know-it-all, it's time I proved it. So what I did was, I've gone on Quora, as well as Reddit, and I've dug up some really great Star Trek questions. They're based in Star Trek. Some of the questions I feel like are elementary, other ones I feel like a little more complicated, need a little more conversation. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm going to try my best to put some chapter notes down below so you can kind of see some of the questions ahead of time and hopefully maybe jump to an answer you like. Also thinking about, depending on the length of the question, sort of splitting this up into smaller segment videos so we can have a little more personal discussions. Otherwise, comment below about any question that comes up and ask your own questions, because I'd really love to take the opportunity and continue these videos moving forward with your actual questions. So without further ado, here we go. What's the first question?
How come in Star Trek, people from different planets can understand each other perfectly?
Okay, well, that's actually been discussed in Star Trek canon as well. It's called the Universal Translator. Specifically, in early days, it was a device, and then later on, it was built into, so for instance, in the early days of Star Trek, like the original series, Kirk's era and whatnot, and actually even before, no, I think even before that, I think in Enterprise, they talked about how it was being developed, but it was a real clunky, like, box thing. And then in the original series, there was one episode where Kirk was talking to a being, and he was holding what looked almost like a lightsaber. It was like a rod of some sort, and that was supposed to be the Universal Translator. In later days, Next Generation moving forward, they built it into the comm badges. So literally at all given times, the comm badge is receiving data and it's translating it. Now, they use Hollywood shorthand, which is just showing us talking and communicating. But the truth is, when an alien species is talking to us in their own dialect, the Universal Translator is in fact doing a thing where we get to see, where we get to hear what they're saying in our language. So hopefully that answers the question for you. Comment below, let me know what you thought, what your thoughts are. Is there other places where the description of a Universal Translator is discussed? I'm talking mainly, primarily in the canon that we have, which is movies and TV shows, as well as some of the animated prospects. But yeah, so there you go. Computer, what's the next question?
How is it that I may not be a huge fan of Star Trek Voyager, but I am a huge fan of Captain Janeway?
Well, this is gonna so bite me in the butt. I was not a big fan of Voyager. There were I got into Voyager a little more toward the back half once 7 of 9 came on and whatnot, because I was a boy, come on, and she was wearing literally a leotard. But actually, for me, it was when they started doing these really interesting crossovers. There was a crossover episode where not crossovers, but wrestling crossed into with The Rock. The Rock played an alien wrestler. 7 of 9 had to fight him, and that actually pulled me right back in. And from then on, I was there till the end of the series. But still, so I didn't like Janeway. I felt like Janeway was full of contradictions at the time in Voyager. I was not a big fan of that character. And again, Voyager itself was kind of left me cold in a lot of areas. Other places, I loved, I thought they were great. So, but now, funny enough, watching Prodigy, I am, check out my Prodigy reviews. I'm actually pretty into the character that they are putting, the Janeway hologram, I'm into. I think she's really cool. I think she does she communicates really well, and I like her. My issues with Voyager and Janeway and Voyager was, I felt like the writing was hit or miss, in that one minute it was, we have to uphold the Prime Directive. The next minute it was, well, what are we going to do? We got to survive out here. And it's just, there are lots of back and forths in that regard. So, but yeah, hope that answers your question. Computer, next question.
Did JJ Abrams intend on making the Kelvin Timeline, or did fan backlash create it?
So, yes, JJ Abrams did intend to create the Kelvin Timeline. Not because he didn't go to Paramount, CBS, whoever Viacom at the time, and say, hey, I have this really great idea for a thing. We're going to create a whole new timeline. What he did was, he was brought in to reboot the Star Trek film franchise. And what he said was, well, but he was given strictures rather. See, because of some very complicated corporate machinations, at the time, Viacom had been split. So you had CBS, you had Viacom. You had the television arm and you had the film arm. And at the time, Star Trek was owned by the television arm. So, and they had licensed it. Now, through some really poor contract writing, they licensed it in such a way. It's actually Les Moonves's fault. And if anybody who knows anything about Hollywood and the entertainment industry, Les Moonves never wanted to let. He was one of those guys who liked to hold on to things, and he was of the mindset, hey, if they want it, blah blah blah, they can pay for this and that. Didn't matter that they were the same. These were okay. They were two separate companies because they had been split, but at the time, they were still like, they came from the same roots, essentially. Anyway, and so that whole thing got really complicated quick. So I believe fully. Now, you may know, by all means, comment below. Let me know if you've read something different. Link me to it. I don't remember if there's been any kind of interviews where he's talked about it differently. But my understanding is that JJ Abrams went into it with the knowledge that he was going to have to figure something out because he wasn't going to be able to use all the toys exactly the way they were, which was fine because they were looking to update this anyway. Essentially do what Star Trek Strange New Worlds has finally done, which is they were looking to tell the Star Trek movie stories or the Star Trek stories with a new font, the current production value and all those good things. Maybe not so many lens flares, Jay. Just saying. Anyway, computer, next question, please.
In Star Trek, are there as many parallel Vulcans as parallel Earths? Based on parallel Earths, does every planet in Star Trek have dozens of duplicates?
I'm going to parse this question and say that based on the question, you're not actually talking about parallel universes, like the Mirror universe or the Picard Season 2 alternate Earth history universe that isn't, I'm going to say you're not talking about that. And I'm going to say you're talking about the duplicate species theory. So duplicate species theory is the reason why it's a scientific, it says that in order for life to survive, this is the perfect template. 2 eyes, a mouth, 2 ears, this whole idea. This was what, and it helped for budgetary reasons, but this is what Gene Roddenberry latched onto in the early days of developing Star Trek. The idea was, okay, what happens if, another species evolves, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Now, they have different things that will evolve with them, i.e. Vulcans have the ears and other things and strength based on their gravity and all these other items and whatnot. So the same idea. So going back to the question, if there are many parallel Earths, does every planet in Star Trek have dozens of duplicates? Okay, no. I believe what happens, it isn't so much that they have duplicates as much as species evolve on a similar track. I would cite some original series episodes where there are a few times where they were it's like an Earth-type humanoid species and they're developing like humans did. And those were a product of the budgets of the era. It really had nothing to do with actual scientific theory. Now, the scientific theory is, yes, if life evolves and this is the perfect template for it, then most life will be in some way, shape, or form this way. Bipedal, 2 arms, mostly the whole bit. So I think in that regard, there aren't exactly duplicates of species as much as because Romulans are not duplicates of Vulcans. Romulans and Vulcans have a shared heritage, and at some point, they split off from each other. A colony group ship went somewhere else, did something else, didn't want to follow Vulcans and their logic and this and that, and became Vulcans 2.0 or Romulans. Anyway, so in that regard, people don't all have duplicates. Yes, life evolves in the Star Trek universe like this. Hope that answers your question. Computer, next question.
In Star Trek 4, how did an injured Chekov wind up in a civilian hospital when he was injured in the Alameda Naval Shipyard? Doesn't a naval base of that size have its own hospital facilities?
A naval base of that size absolutely has its own hospital facilities. Generally speaking, however, they do not have on-hand, ready-to-go specialized surgeons. So Chekov would have most likely been taken immediately to the local shipyard, the hospital there on base. And the minute they realized that he was a brain hemorrhage or something along those lines, he would have been transferred to a civilian hospital with a specialist on duty. That's why, because remember, he was there for brain surgery because they had to alleviate the pressure in his head. Healing with medievalism, drilling holes in his head's not the answer. Remember, McCoy says all these things. So yeah, there you go. Computer, next question.
In Star Trek, was Lore being honest when he told Data that he loved him right before Data deactivated and dismantled him forever?
Yes, he was lying. No, he was not. He was not being honest. He was lying. Lore is by nature the worst possible version of what Data wants to be. Lore woke up that morning and chose violence. So versus Data, who was, because Data lacked the emotions to have this different ambition, different things like that. What he did was he acclimatized to our culture and the way we do things and whatnot. Whereas Lore was a troubled kid from the start. He was a greedy child. He was one who wanted to feel more love and affection and everything else he never got and all that other good stuff. So I believe 100% it was a manipulative tactic. And I don't know that you can really trust anything Lore has to say. So yeah, there you go. Computer, next question.
In TNG Season 7 Episode 9 Forces of Nature, it stated that warp speed was damaging warp space, to keep warp speed 7 or below. If warp space was damaged, there could be no more faster than light travel. Interstellar civilizations would collapse. How did they overcome this issue?
They didn't. I'm kidding. So I think maybe 2 episodes later or so, there's an emergency, and we find out that the Federation has set a speed limit of warp 5 as their base maximum warp, and then with special reasoning or special instructions or whatever else, you then can they were able to go push it a little further. And I think in that episode they were like, okay, we're going to waive the speed limit, go maximum warp, whatever. And then so that is the simple answer. The more complicated answer. That's the complicated answer. The more simple answer is these kinds of storylines were usually set up by very creative writers who wanted to establish certain things and kind of move the needle forward in terms of Star Trek and its universe and everything else. But what happened was, like a lot of other plot threads, that because it was episodic, they were not held on to very much. They weren't held on to very tightly. So what you ended up with was all these really great ideas that just kind of went by the wayside, and eventually, as the show progressed, were lost. Or as one answer on Quora said in that thread, it was forgotten the next week. So yeah, because syndication and Star Trek. All right, well listen, that's going to do it for today for this edition of the Know-It-All Files, where we talked about Star Trek. So there you go, now you know, and if knowing is half the battle, you're halfway to being a know-it-all yourself. So, all right, guys, comment below. Give me your questions. I would love to start asking the questions you guys have for me about Star Trek. I've held panels at MegaCon, WonderCon, not Comic-Con yet, but I would love to someday. Specifically where we just talked and it was just me with the crowd and it was engaging and it was fun. So by all means, throw me your questions. Love to have a debate, love to discuss some of that stuff, and I'd love to see what the comment section has to say. So like always, we'll see you next time, and never forget, everyone loves a know-it-all.